Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're heading back to ancient Judah.
Lots to unpack there.
There is.
Mm.
We're going to be looking at the reigns of 4 kings, Amaziah, Uzziah, Jotham, and we'll even touch a little bit on Ahaz. And to do that, we're going to be in 2 Chronicles, chapters 25 to 27.
Right.
And this is a period of time in Judah's history where there's a lot of, well, everything. Ambition, divine intervention, family drama, you name it, we've got it.
Yeah, I mean, you're really seeing these chapters, the ups and downs of leadership. You see the successes. You see some pretty spectacular failures. But I think the thing that's really interesting is how, even though these stories are thousands of years old, they still resonate with us today.
They do.
You know, in terms of the challenges of leadership, the temptations of power.
Absolutely.
These are themes that are just as relevant now as they were back then.
Yeah, for sure. So let's jump right in. We're going to start with King Amaziah in 2 Chronicles 25. And right off the bat, the chronicler, the one who's writing this history, gives us this interesting little detail. He says that Amaziah did what was right in the sight of the Lord, only not wholeheartedly. So it's like he's giving us a little warning flag right from the start, isn't he?
It's almost like a little asterisk
Right.
next to his name. Like, okay, he's doing okay, but...
But there's more to this story.
Exactly. And I think that phrase, not wholeheartedly, is really crucial. You know, in ancient Israel, being wholehearted in your devotion to God, it wasn't just about, like, personal piety.
Right.
It was deeply intertwined with how you ruled.
Oh, interesting.
It was about justice. It was about fairness. It was about caring for the vulnerable. So when it says Amaziah wasn't wholehearted, it's like hinting that there's a crack in his foundation.
The crack in the foundation, yeah.
That might just spread.
And spread it does? Well, maybe not directly from that, but there's definitely a lot going on.
Yeah.
So he starts off his reign, right, by executing his father's assassins, which, you might expect.
Right. Seems like a pretty standard power move for the time.
It does. But then he takes this interesting turn. He spares their children.
Interesting.
Citing Mosaic law.
Okay.
So he's like, look, I'm going to get my revenge, but I'm not going to break God's law in the process.
Right, because in Deuteronomy, it specifically says that children shouldn't be punished for the sins of their parents.
Exactly.
So it's interesting, right? Amaziah, he's caught between this desire for, well, I guess you could call it justice, or maybe revenge.
Right.
But he's also trying to operate within the bounds of the law.
Yeah. He's got a moral compass. Whether he's always following it fully is another question.
Yeah, exactly.
But he's definitely aware of it.
Yes.
So after this, he goes on and he leads Judah in this major victory against Edom.
Oh, yeah. Big victory.
Huge. And, we've got to stop for a second and just imagine what those ancient battles would have been like.
Oh, I know. The scale of it.
The hand-to-hand combat.
The chariots, the noise, it must have been terrifying.
I know. It just gives me chills thinking about it. But anyway, so he wins this big victory, but then he does something really strange.
What's that?
He brings back their idols.
Oh, boy.
He's like, you know what? These Edomite gods, they seem to be doing something right.
Not a good look.
Not a good look at all.
Especially for a king who's supposed to be leading his people in the worship of Yahweh.
Right. So what's the significance of that? I mean, why was bringing back idols such a big deal? So we left off with Amaziah bringing back those Edomite idols after his big victory.
Yeah, not exactly a smart move.
Not a good look for a king who's supposed to be, leading his people in the worship of Yahweh, the one true God.
Right. It's like he's saying, hey, maybe these other gods have something to offer. And that just did not fly in ancient Israel.
So he gets called out for it.
Oh, big time. A prophet shows up and he's like, excuse me, Your Majesty, but what do you think you're doing?
I can imagine that got his attention.
The prophets, they didn't mess around. They were like the conscience of the kings, constantly reminding them of their covenant with God.
Right. And that covenant, that was everything, wasn't it?
It was the foundation of their entire society. It was their identity, their protection, their whole reason for being.
So when a king started messing around with other gods, it wasn't just a personal choice.
It was a threat to their entire way of life.
Wow. So what happens next? Does Amaziah listen?
Well, let's just say he doesn't exactly change his tune. In fact, he gets a little cocky. He decides to test his luck against King Joash of Israel.
Oh boy, I remember this story. That doesn't end well.
Nope. Joash is not exactly thrilled about this challenge, and he basically tells Amaziah he's out of his mind.
I love how he does it, though. It's that parable about the thorn bush and the cedar tree.
Yeah, one of my favorites.
So much imagery in just a few lines. He's basically saying, look, you're a thorn bush. I'm a mighty cedar. Don't even try it.
And it's brilliant on so many levels. I mean, first of all, it shows that Joash, he's not just a warrior, he's a skilled diplomat.
He knows how to use words as weapons, too.
Exactly. And then there's the symbolism, right? The cedar tree, it represents strength, stability, something that's been around for generations. And the thorn bush, well, it's small, insignificant, kind of prickly.
Yeah, not exactly the image of a powerful king.
Exactly. So Joash is basically putting Amaziah in his place without even lifting a sword.
But Amaziah doesn't listen, does he?
Nope. Pride comes before the fall, as they say.
And fall he does. He gets crushed in battle, humiliated in front of his people, loses a big chunk of Jerusalem to Joash.
And to top it all off, he gets assassinated by his own people.
Talk about a fall from grace.
It's really tragic, isn't it? I mean, Amaziah, he started off with so much promise. He had this moment of, well, you could call it mercy, with the assassin's children. He won this huge victory. But then it's like he couldn't handle the success.
The pride got to him.
Exactly. And it ultimately cost him everything.
A classic tragedy.
Absolutely.
So after Amaziah's, shall we say, eventful reign, we come to his son, Uzziah. He takes the throne at the ripe old age of 16.
Talk about pressure following in those footsteps.
Right. But unlike his father, Uzziah seems to really take the lessons of the past to heart.
Yeah, at least at first.
So tell us, what kind of king does Uzziah turn out to be?
Well, in many ways, he's the king Amaziah could never be. He's a strong military leader, expands Judah's territory, fortifies Jerusalem, invests in infrastructure.
He sounds like he's got it all figured out.
He does. For a while. But then, well, there's a reason we're telling his story, Race. Things take a turn.
Okay, here we go again. Another king, another dramatic turn. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Well, Uzziah, he lets the success go to his head a bit, starts thinking he's maybe a little bit above the law.
Uh-oh, this sounds familiar.
And he decides to enter the temple and offer incense.
Okay, now that might not sound like a big deal to us today,
Not at all.
but I'm guessing it was a huge no-no back then.
You could say that. It was like walking into the Oval Office and declaring yourself president.
Wow.
You don't do that. Offering incense, it was the role of the priests, it was their sacred duty, and it was a powerful symbol of the separation between the secular and the sacred.
So Uzziah was overstepping some serious boundaries.
Big time.
And what happens?
Hmm.
Do the priests try to stop him?
They do. They confront him, they plead with him, they warn him about the consequences.
But Uzziah, he's not backing down.
He's the king, remember. He's used to getting his own way, so he ignores their warnings, marches right into the temple, incense burner in hand, and leprosy right there on his forehead. Instant divine judgment.
Oh, wow. Talk about a dramatic exit.
You can't make this stuff up.
So what happens to Uzziah?
Well, leprosy, it wasn't just a physical ailment in ancient Israel. It was a sign of ritual impurity, which meant Uzziah, he had to be isolated. He lived out his days in a separate house, stripped of his power and prestige.
What a tragic end to a reign that started with so much promise.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? About the nature of power, the dangers of pride, the importance of staying humble.
It's a story that's as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we need a moment to process all of that. Uzziah's reign, it's a roller coaster of emotions. But we've still got one more king to cover in this deep dive, Jotham, Uzziah's son. And thankfully, his story seems to be a little less intense. So Ahaz, the son who seemingly, well, didn't learn from the whole don't mess with the divine blueprint thing, what went wrong with his reign?
Yeah, talk about a departure from dear old dad. You know, where Jotham was portrayed as this steady, righteous leader, Ahaz veers sharply off course.
In what way?
Well, the chronicler doesn't really hold back. He portrays Ahaz as like one of the most unfaithful kings in Judah's history.
Really? How so?
Oh, he embraced idolatry. He went so far as to sacrifice his own son in a pagan ritual.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's a whole other level.
It is. Yeah, it's a far cry from his father, who wouldn't even go near the incense altar.
That's right. Yeah. Uzziah, for all his faults, he still had that respect for the temple, the rituals, you know?
Right.
It was like he knew there was a line he couldn't cross.
Yeah, and Ahaz he bulldozed right over that line.
And this wasn't just about, like, personal religious choices.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, this was ancient Judah. Religion and politics, they were completely intertwined.
So what kind of political ramifications did Ahaz's actions have?
Well, for one, he formed alliances with Assyria.
Assyria. Weren't they kind of a big deal back then?
Oh, yeah. They were a regional superpower known for their military might and, also their brutality.
Not exactly who you want as your new best friend.
No, not at all. But Ahaz saw them as a way to, secure his own power.
So he's playing a dangerous game.
Very dangerous. And it didn't stop there. Ahaz, he even started adopting Assyrian religious practices.
Really? Wow. Talk about a complete rejection of his own heritage.
It's like he was trying to erase his own cultural identity. And it's interesting, right? Because we see these same kinds of tensions playing out even today.
What do you mean?
Well, think about how leaders today, they grapple with the relationship between, their personal beliefs, the expectations of their office, the pressures of international relations. It's this delicate balancing act that Ahaz just completely fumbled.
He did. He really did. So as we wrap up this deep dive into these 4 kings of Judah, what are some of the key takeaways? What can we learn from these very flawed, very human leaders?
Well, I think one thing that stands out is that leadership, it's not about perfection. These kings, they all had their flaws, they made mistakes, some bigger than others.
Yeah, no kidding.
But it's about, how they responded to those mistakes. Did they learn? Did they grow? Did they try to course correct?
Right, because some of them did, and some of them, well, they just kept digging that hole deeper.
Exactly. And I think that's a powerful lesson for us even today, because none of us are perfect leaders. But it's in those moments of failure, those moments when we stumble, that we have the opportunity to either double down on our mistakes or to choose a different path.
That's a good word. So as we look back at the reigns of Amaziah, Uzziah, Jotham, and Ahaz, we see ambition, we see piety, we see rebellion, we see the consequences of both good and bad leadership.
All there.
And it reminds us that the stories of these ancient kings, they're not just dusty tales in an old book. They offer timeless insights into the human condition, the challenges of power, and the enduring search for wisdom, for guidance, maybe even for redemption. So the next time you're faced with a tough decision, a moment where you're tempted to stray from your values, remember these kings. Their stories, they might just give you the courage to choose a different path.
Beautifully said.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time.
Welcome to Charlie and Mia's podcast. We're embarking on an exciting journey to read through the entire Bible in just 1 year. Every day, we dive into Scripture, exploring its meanings and how it applies to our lives today. We invite you to join us on this incredible adventure of learning and discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode.